Welcome to the Contreras Report International Edition in these last few days of November 2020. I am Raoul Lowery Contreras. In this international edition of the Contreras Report, I ask and answer this question: is the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan religious? Over the last few weeks, I have talked extensively about Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict and the recent 44-day war between these two countries in the Caucasus. Why? Because located between Russia, Iran, and Turkey, at the crossroads of the ancient Silk Road and new east-west, north-south transport links, this is a crucial region for the United States and the world at large. I have tried to explain the background of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, including some nuances that are overlooked by the mainstream media in the West. Today, I would like to talk about another aspect. During the 44-day war, we saw many attempts framing this conflict as a Christian-Muslim war. Such propaganda came primarily from Armenia's Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, who labeled the conflict as a war between Christian and Muslim civilizations. It also came from Armenian lobby organizations and their allies in the United States and Europe. To back up these claims, Armenian propaganda machine and its supporters constantly promoted the hyped-up claims about, quote, Islamist jihadists from Syria fighting on the Azerbaijani side. The Armenian side or their friends have not been able to provide a shred of credible evidence buttressing these claims about Syrian mercenaries, except some videos which in the meantime have been identified as staged videos. Nevertheless, this label of a, quote, majority Muslim country versus a Christian country was quite attractive and convenient for many Islamophobic and white supremacist forces in the West. They use it for their own racist propaganda. Armenia even went as far as inviting neo-Nazis from Germany to the occupied Karabakh in the middle of the war. Also, French neo-Nazis joined volunteer groups fighting for Armenia. Even some pundits in Washington, D.C. saw in the Armenia-Azerbaijan war an opportunity to promote their ideology. Take, for example, Michael Rubin, neocon hawk working for the American Enterprise Institute. Since the war started, Rubin has become a main mouthpiece for Armenia's Islamophobic propaganda in the District of Columbia, publishing a series of articles primarily in a publication called The National Interest, a controversial publication known for its ties to Russia. In his articles, Michael Rubin promotes the same false premise, labeling the conflict in religious terms as a Christian-Muslim war, primarily focusing on the alleged Syrian mercenaries and alleged threats to Christian heritage without offering any serious evidence. The purpose of this propaganda by Armenia and its friends was clear: to amass support for Armenia against Azerbaijan in the West. Did Armenia achieve its goal? Now, with the hindsight and absolute certainty, the answer is a big, fat no. N-O. Except for a few neo-Nazi Islamophobic white supremacist racists, no one in the West seriously believes that the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict is a Christian-Muslim war. On the contrary, Armenia's propaganda has hurt Armenia itself. In its haste to ramp up support from wherever and whomever possible, leaders in the capital of Armenia, Yerevan, seem to have forgotten that labeling the conflict as a religious war would damage Armenia's standing among Muslim nations. Now, in order to minimize the self-inflicted damage, the president of Armenia has been traveling across the Arab nations for the last couple of weeks, assuring them publicly that it is not and has never been a religious conflict. And he is right. The conflict has nothing to do with religion. Otherwise, how can one explain the fact that Iran, a Muslim country, has for the most part of the last 3 decades strongly supported Armenia, whereas Israel has been a strong ally of Azerbaijan alongside many Christian nations, including the United States? Azerbaijan is known for its secularism. In fact, established in 1918, the Republic of Azerbaijan became the first secular democracy among all Muslim nations. When Azerbaijan granted women the right to vote and run for public office in 1919, as one of the world's very first countries to do so, women in the United States, France, and many other European countries were still struggling to get the same universal suffrage. The history of Christianity in Azerbaijan is as old as the religion itself. The oldest church in the Caucasus was established in Azerbaijan in the 1st century by Bartholomew, one of Jesus' apostles. In 313, the ancestral state of the Azerbaijani people, the Caucasian Albania, became one of the world's earliest Christian states. Today, alongside Muslims, 500,000 Christians of all denominations, both Orthodox, Protestants, Catholics, even Jehovah's Witnesses, and Latter-day Saints continue to freely live and practice their faith in Azerbaijan. Many churches in Azerbaijan have been renovated and restored by the government of Azerbaijan at government expense, and not only in Azerbaijan, beyond the country's borders also. The Heydar Aliyev Foundation, led by Azerbaijan's First Lady, Mehriban Aliyeva, who is also a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador, has renovated many cathedrals and churches in France, Bulgaria, Greece, Russia, and other European countries. Even catacombs in the Vatican. No wonder Pope Francis visited Baku in 2016. I was there. I saw him. And he highly praised Azerbaijan's exemplary model of interfaith tolerance. He held a mass at the Catholic Church, which was built in downtown Baku on land donated by the president of Azerbaijan. Despite the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, over 30,000 ethnic Armenians have continued to peacefully live in Azerbaijan's major cities like Baku, Ganja, and others. There is a beautiful Armenian church in downtown Baku, renovated and restored and protected by Azerbaijan. The church has an extensive library of 5,000 ancient Armenian books, perfectly preserved as Armenian cultural heritage by the government of Azerbaijan. Chief Armenian religious leader, Catholicos Garagan II, visited this church in 2010 and prayed there. He was deeply impressed by how well the church has been maintained. Alongside the Christian community, there is a large Jewish community living in Azerbaijan. Around 30,000 Jews peacefully live in Azerbaijan. In fact, it's one of the safest countries for Jews in the world, as attested by many prominent Jewish faith leaders. Today, it's much safer to be openly Jewish wearing a kippah in the streets of Baku or elsewhere in Azerbaijan than in Paris, Brussels, or Vienna. I have witnessed it myself, visiting Azerbaijan with many Orthodox Jewish friends over the years. Next to them are Baha'is, who moved to Azerbaijan as soon as their faith was established in Iran, what was called Persia. Fleeing persecutions in Iran, the Baha'is is found a safe haven in Azerbaijan, establishing their presence there from the 1850s onwards, so much so that a few decades later, a Baha'i Azerbaijani became the richest oil magnate in the country. Today, there are around 2,000 Baha'is in peacefully living and practicing in Azerbaijan. There is even a statue in the center of Baku, which is called a statue of a liberated woman. It is based on the story of Tahiru, one of the major figures of the Baha'i faith, who was an ethnic Azerbaijani herself. Azerbaijan is the world's only majority Muslim nation with a statue of a woman. taking off her veil. Azerbaijan helps all religious communities, not only by building and rebuilding their houses of worship, it also helps them financially to maintain their respective communities. It's a rare case of a staunchly secular government funding and helping the nation's faith groups in every regard possible. In the latest 44-day war, many Azerbaijani Christians and Jews, as well as representatives of all ethnic minorities living in Azerbaijan, joined the military and valiantly fought in Karabakh defending Azerbaijan. So after all this, all the blabbering about this conflict being a Christian-Muslim conflict seems extremely stupid, and obviously malicious. It is a conflict that's a result of Armenia's baseless territorial claims driven by maximalist nationalism against Azerbaijan, territorial claims that were rejected by the entire world. The Security Council has clearly stated that Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent districts which were invaded and occupied by Armenia are in an inalienable, integral part of Azerbaijan. Now, while we are on the topic, on November 25th, the French Senate passed a resolution suggesting to the French government that it recognize the independence of Artsakh. For those who don't know, Artsakh is the name Armenia uses for Nagorno-Karabakh. When Armenia raised territorial claims against Azerbaijan, their goal was to achieve the annexation of Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. But then they understood that it would be hard to get the global community to agree to this violent annexation. So Armenia opted for framing the conflict as a fight of Armenians in Karabakh for independence and freedom, self-determination. For this purpose, the so-called Nagorno-Karabakh Republic was established in Azerbaijan's occupied areas. Ever since this so-called republic has been a de facto part of Armenia, funded and run from Yerevan, as confirmed by a ruling of the European Court of Human Rights in 2015. No country in the world has recognized this illegal entity as an independent country, not even Armenia. So now French senators want this so-called republic recognized by France. Of course, as you may guess, the resolution was introduced and passed at the behest of the large and wealthy Armenian diaspora in France. France is home to around 500,000 ethnic Armenians. They are wealthy and they have lots of money. If French senators are crazy about independence for Karabakh and are ready to open the Pandora's box and support separatism, then they should perhaps start with many French overseas territories who have yearned for independence for many centuries now. This is the reason why the French government looks disinclined to fulfilling the Armenian lobby's wish. French President Macron said last week that Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent districts are part of Azerbaijan under international law, as recognized by the United Nations. He said it directly to Armenians in Paris. And after this resolution, the French Foreign Ministry said that France did not plan to recognize Nagorno-Karabakh as an independent country. That's also fair. France is one of the mediators of the Minsk group that deals with the conflict. Therefore, France is supposed to be neutral, an honest broker. If France has actually been neutral, it's been highly questionable. During the latest escalation, France openly took Armenia's side. President Macron, his pro-Armenian bias is based both on his personal relationship with the Armenian diaspora as well as is nurtured by his extreme anti-Turkish bias. It seems to be hard for him to accept Turkey's increased role in the South Caucasus in general and in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict in particular. This also coincided with rising Islamophobia in France. The mediator status of France as a co-chair of the Minsk group is already being questioned as there are calls in Azerbaijan to revoke this status. We will see soon how things will turn out. You can trust me to bring forth the best information for this part of the world. Yes, I'm Raoul Lowery Contreras, and there aren't many people in the West who have stood on the, quote, line of contact, unquote, and watched Armenian shells being fired from one part of Azerbaijan, the occupied part, to another part of the country, the free part. I'm one of the few that has seen damage inflicted by artillery barrages on Azerbaijani citizens, or asked why so many wells and canals costing millions of dollars are necessary for Azerbaijani farmers to work and produce in an area that has been watered by streams and rivers from the Nagorno-Karabakh mountains since the beginning of time. Answer: Armenians blocked natural water flows from the Karabakh in an attempt to turn a historically rich agricultural land into a desert, just like they did in Agdam. There, they turned a thriving city of 50,000 into an urban desert with no one living there and where not a single building still stands since they occupied the place. I will bring you news of what really goes on in the lands, villages, towns, and cities that have been liberated by Azerbaijanis. Why? Tell you why. Because interviews I've conducted in Azerbaijan have deeply impressed me and reminded me that Americans have never been bombarded by enemies on a nightly basis. Example, the young woman who told me that she and the other children of her village went to bed wearing their shoes so they could run to bomb shelters when Armenian guns shelled her village at night. Or the woman, then 20, who was captured by Armenian forces in February 1992 in a town called Kojali, tortured, raped, and thrown onto a pile of trash to die. Over 600 of her neighbors, men, women, and children, unarmed men, women, and children, were massacred by Armenian forces that night. You don't have to believe me. Human Rights Watch documented it. Or how about the other teenage woman who gave birth to a baby during a bombardment, was captured and forced to march to another Armenian-held town where she and her 3-day-old baby were held until they were traded to Azerbaijan for grain and oil. Or being surrounded by internally displaced persons who were forced from their homes by invading Armenians in the very territory just liberated from a 27-year-long occupation. Older people holding my hand and telling me they gathered around me and they held my hand and they begged me to help them go home. I'm not a tin man. These experiences affected me deeply. That's why I spend time passing information to you, information you may not get anywhere else. Thank you for being there. I'm Raoul Lowery Contreras, and this is the Contreras Report International Edition in the last days of November 2020. If you subscribe to this, you will be instantly notified of new programs when they are uploaded. Thank you for being there.